Welcome to the Delighted Customers Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Slayton, and I'm so glad you're here. I talk to guests with a wide range of expertise who share meaningful insights and wisdom. We give you practical tips, proven frameworks, and share ways to help you delight your customers. Today, I am so excited to have on the show Alex Genov, who is the head of customer experience research at Zappos. He's going to share with us his reflections of working with the legendary founder and CEO, the late Tony Hsieh, developing a culture of meaning, Zappos' scrappy beginnings and how that translated to results down the road. We'll also talk about the shift that Zappos is undergoing right now from customer service excellence to customer experience excellence. We'll also talk about Zappos Adaptive, which underscores Zappos' commitment to diversity and inclusion. And we'll talk about Alex's new book called Forget the Customer, See the Person. All that and a sneak preview into a little stand-up comedy from Alex, which should be a lot of fun. Well, I can't tell you how excited I am to have my guest on the show today, Alex Genov. Alex is the head of customer experience research at Zappos. And if you've been in the customer experience world a while, you know Zappos. You've heard about Delivering Happiness, the book by Tony Hsieh, and the storied legacy that this company has for kind of breaking through as a leader and really trailblazing in the world of starting everything from the customer and the customer's perspective and the customer's lens. Alex is an experienced customer research professional who applies his experimental social psychology background and his passion for research, design, and innovation to solving important customer and business problems. His professional goal is to help teams create remarkable products and services which make people's lives easier and more enjoyable. Hallelujah. Fewer ruined days, I once heard someone say. Right? Currently, Alex is leading customer research for the Zappos family of companies. You may know they have expanded. In previous positions, he was responsible for research and usability of the products and services for companies like TurboTax, State Farm Insurance, and the Active Network. Alex has a PhD in experimental social psychology and over 25 years of relevant experience, with 5 years of academic research and over 20 years of customer research in the software industry. Alex's areas of expertise include defining and measuring emotions, and we know emotional connection is one of the most powerful impacts of loyalty as it relates to the customer experience, and the psychology of individual differences, usability, market research, and consumer segmentation, customer experience research, and strategy. And he's also a newly acclaimed author. So we're going to have some fun today talking about a little bit about Zappos and the legendary customer service that Zappos is and customer experience in general, and some more about the book. So I'm very excited. Would you please let me welcome Alex Genov to the show.
Thank you, Mark. You're way too generous in your opening remarks.
Well, I can't tell you how excited I am to have you today. And let's start off by asking you, how did you go from experimental social psychology to the CX world?
Right. It was takes me back, Mark. It takes me back a few years. It was not a natural transition, I would say. It was made, from necessity in a way. So I came to the States to study psychology. Came from Bulgaria as an undergraduate, and then on a student visa back in the early 90s, 91. And when I finished my bachelor's degree, I studied psychology. Was lucky to study psychology with some of the luminaries of psychological research over at Cornell. And then I wanted to continue to stay in this country, and I wanted to maintain my student visa status. So my next step was to continue studying. So I did that for another 6-7 years. That's how I got my degree in psychology. But then to your question about transitioning, it was a bit of a scary time because my first instinct was to try to become a professor, but it was really extremely difficult at the time to get a good position somewhere. And I was so sick and tired of being extremely poor. 1 year I lived on $6,000, if you can believe it. I have my IRS records there.
Wow.
But so then I started looking online, and this was again early days of online job searches and so on. And I would put in psychology as a keyword, and usability started coming up in great companies like Boeing and Microsoft. I lived in Seattle at the time. And I looked into it, and turns out that it was just a very practical application of psychological research and psychological methods. And it was all about making products and services easier to use, more intuitive, less frustrating. And I easily transitioned from that point on. My first main gig was with State Farm Insurance, and at the time, everybody was investing in big usability labs, multi-million-dollar usability labs, and State Farm had 6,000 programmers, if you can imagine, at the time.
Wow.
So it was a great team, and got started there. But then, with time, transitioned more to broader CX research, and then before Zappos, I worked at a smaller company, startup at the time in San Diego. And then I got exposed to market research and to analytics and so on, and picked up market research from a friend of mine now, a former PhD, neuroscience PhD turned market researcher. And so the rest is history.
What an interesting road pathway you got into this. And do you love it?
I love it. I love it, and it's what I really like is this continuing to evolve and change, and that's what Zappos was. It's a great company for many reasons, but this is one of those reasons. Is it encourages you to kind of be yourself and to look for meaningful, opportunities to do new things, not necessarily just climb the proverbial ladder, and that's why I've stayed there for so long.
And so you come from this world of social psychology, and now you're in the CX world, and you just said you love it. So I'm going to ask you, if you were talking to someone who is completely new to the world of customer experience, how would you explain to them that customer experience is a brand differentiator?
Right. It's you can go down the road of all these big companies, those consultancies that do huge research and show the ROI and so on. There are these studies showing ROI and correlating CX KPIs with business outcomes and so on. But we all are customers. We all use products and services, and we all know when we get frustrated, right? And now that this is what we call the experience. It's your emotional state when you use. It's how using these products and services make you feel ultimately. I mean, you usually employ them for a job to be done. To use Clay Christensen's model and term, you want to accomplish something with them, but at the end of the day, it's how they make you feel, right? There's another saying about interpersonal relationships. It's you many times don't remember what somebody did or said, but you remember how they made you feel. That's the same thing.
Right.
So then nowadays we have so many choices as consumers, and there's now fewer and fewer really successful product-centric companies where they're the best and they cannot be touched by any other competitor, or they're a monopoly, right? And we don't have a choice and so on. So there's fewer of those success stories, and based on the amount of choice we have and the variety of products and services, loyalty has to be earned. It's not a given, right? That you offer something, you talk about, you create an experience. You have nice designs and so on, but ultimately it's how you make your customers feel.
Yeah. Well said. I like that. It's a really simple way to think about it. And speaking of how you make your customers feel, you had the chance to meet and work with Tony Hsieh, who is one of the icons of disruption in the early days. And there was someone that, I worked at a regional bank in the Mid Atlantic states, and we shared videos of him. He was one of the, I think, early using some of the Net Promoter Score metrics, and but beyond the metrics and the ways to measure, like, what was his approach? Because you could buy, if you were not familiar with Zappos and you're listening on the podcast today, they got their start. I believe they started with brick and mortar, but then quickly went over to a distribution model that involved online ordering of shoes. So shoes. So I have a family member who was put out of business because he was in the shoe distribution business, and the brick and mortars, that were in the margins there, they weren't adding value as middlemen, so to speak, and that's what he did. We're feeling it. So, but tell me, you got to meet Tony, and tell me what was behind the thinking of this new model back in the day.
Right, Mark. Great question. So, I mean, I was lucky to experience Zappos under Tony Hsieh and to meet Tony. I was not, working closely with him, or I was not part of his inner circle, or
Hmm.
that. But I was there for a few years when he was doing all his experiments and so on, and I experienced this firsthand, and also got to know him a little bit as a person, got to know his parents, got to participate in his kind of soirees. He was a billionaire that lived in a trailer park in downtown Las Vegas.
Oh my gosh.
You go and it's a shady area. It's a trailer park with a low fence, and you look around, you don't even see security. And my wife and I would go there sometimes and to these gatherings. It's like, what's going on? It's a billionaire living here in a very
Mm.
communal way. So, but that was his personality. His approach was very non-traditional, very humble, servant leader. I mean, speaking of just these memories, we would organize these amazing parties before the pandemic, and they were not called the employee party; they were called the vendor party, because Zappos recognized that without the vendors, right, you have nothing. So
Mm.
vendors were put almost like, in a way, for this party were put above employees. But the thinking was, again, employees first, vendors, customers, and so on. But in the middle of, or like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you would see Tony walking around and giving away tacos, right?
Mm.
So that
Well, you met his parents. What was that experience like?
it's great. I mean, great. Again, you begin to understand his roots, and where he gets his kind of humanity and humility and so on. Great people.
Were they immigrants?
Yeah, I think they came to the States to study first. And then, because I have a great interest in Chinese culture, I trained Shaolin Kung Fu, and his dad was really started like really talking to me about it. And it's,
Hmm.
but amazing people. You can see, I mean, they demonstrated this kind of unusual approach to business and building a community in the workplace, because they would organize these little events. So we have a China team that Tony's dad started, and they would visit us in Vegas, and they would organize a little kind of performance party, and they would go up and dance and sing. Tony's parents would be up there on stage.
Hmm.
I mean, what else? What other CEO and billionaire would you think of that his parents would go and dance and perform in front of, right? Um,
Yeah.
but this was to get to your original question. I think, and it's not. I mean, it was you could see it in Tony, but I think it's also apparent in other really successful and remarkable business leaders. I mean, Jeff Bezos and others. This counterintuitive thinking. It's when everybody's going this way, you go that way. So And initially, it sounds crazy to many. At the time, it sounded crazy. Like, you invest in customer service, you're crazy, right? This is a cost. I mean, it just minimize it, right? But Tony would say, no, this just to your point of being a middle person, right? He acknowledged people can buy shoes elsewhere at Nordstrom's, and most people at the time would go to the store and buy at Nordstrom's. So he would say, why would they come to us, right? We need to overcome that barrier, and we're going to do it through amazing customer service. That's going to be our approach. And even nowadays, it's rare. Even 20 plus years later, it's rare. But that was one of those approaches. And then the other one is to say, treat customers well, but treat employees even better, because those employees then are gonna make the customers feel good, right? And so on. So in that respect, again, counterintuitive thinking, developing a culture, meaning, and what it really means is culture is the people. It's not some magical like state or magical entity or something. It's not also just a set of rules. It's the people, but also the rituals and the investment you make. So, Zappos would, over the years, for example, opt to, instead of getting a chunk of money and then peanut buttering it and giving everybody like a small bonus, let's say, right, to go and spend by themselves. Many times, Zappos would invest in creating experiences that we share together, right? And that was, that made you come to work and want to be on campus, want to be with your friends. And I think that's one of those examples of, no offices, for example, no corner offices. Tony the executives didn't have offices. There were no overt kind of symbols of power, right? Other business people that came to Zappos and would wear a tie, they had three choices: either take it off, or keep it but cut in half, or wear it around. These are but that also had the point of that was to say, be yourself, right? And be a natural leader. Don't just put on a suit and to look powerful.
So when you talk about, and thanks for sharing a little bit of the background and sharing a story about ways that they do celebrate culture with, like you just shared, the dance party and the traditional parties, and not necessarily giving a small bonus or whatever, but really trying to do something everybody can participate and to foster a culture of unity. Right. So my question to you is, if you're not familiar with Zappos, and some people may not be as familiar, you can go to their website and probably buy and I know they've expanded into other, but just about any kind of shoe or footwear that you may desire, right? And yet the experience, so that's a kind of thing. That's a personal thing. I have like two different size feet. I have like a 10 and a 10.5. And I want to talk about adaptive a little bit later, but then I have a really narrow, so the idea of buying something online would be like the last item, like, okay, an external hard drive. Yeah. A mouse, no problem. I'm not worried, but a shoe, so how did he break through some of those paradigms in consumers' minds?
Right, my great question. I think we have to think back to, this was the dawn of the internet, right? And dawn of online commerce. And there's a lot of stories of how, again, the ingenious ways in which the team solved problems, very much like Amazon. We are an Amazon company now. We've been for over 10 years. But there's a lot of stories of Jeff Bezos, of their kind of ingenious ways of solving problems, thinking out the box and so on. But for Zappos, it was very scrappy, a startup where they started with drop ship, and they would go to physical stores and ask the owners there, can I take a photo of the shoe because I want to put it on the internet, and they would be asked like, what is the internet? What are you talking about? Say, well, can I take a picture of your shoe and said okay. So they put it on the web and put a buy button underneath it, and if somebody clicked, they would go to the store, purchase the pair, and ship it. So that was the initial
model,
right? Very scrappy and quick, and there would be and then the way Tony invested, he was the initial investor. He would have very specific KPIs for the company. He would never write like a humongous check and say go spend it. He was very disciplined and encouraging results and so on. Every quarter or every month he would release funds. But the result was this very innovative, scrappy approach. And as the company grew with its success, that's why he then very consciously started developing the culture and the rituals and because there were a set of rituals essentially, and the investments. But because as the company grew, he started seeing those startup values get diluted, so he wanted to keep that. But now, speaking of now in a different phase, and Tony's no longer with us. The new CEO now is Scott Schaefer, who's been with the company for 14 years, and he's a great representative of the culture, and he was heading finance for a long time. Now he's building on what Tony was doing, and basically Tony would say that Zappos is a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. Now Scott builds upon that and evolves the brand by saying Zappos now is a customer experience company that happens to sell shoes. Very important, because Tony was so laser focused on customer service, Zappos to where it was, but now a lot of companies focus on customer service. So now it's not that big of a differentiator. So now we're looking at more broadly to digital experiences, to all kinds of other customer centricity approaches.
So can I double click on that nuance for just a minute? Because I think it could be really meaningful that the shift from where you were to this new CEO, Scott, is saying, we're a customer experience company that happens to sell shoes. Why the delineation?
Well, it's I think that the initial, so we need to examine the initial statement, which was basically, again, very Tony's statement was very forward-looking and very prophetic in a way of saying, look, we may be selling shoes now, but we're going to sell other things, and we can help people in other ways, right? Because we're customer service. That's what defines us. I mean, other great companies like Apple, they were called Apple Computer, right? And they dropped the computer part. Right now they're selling watches, and maybe some days they'll sell connected combs. I'm waiting for that day to have like a smart comb, connected comb, and so on, well-designed comb. Well, I mean, I'm joking about that, but they also are a company that innovates, right, and happens to sell XYZ. So that was the impetus for this. And then Scott's kind of evolution of this is to say customer experience is broader than just customer service. And it's, customer service usually is like a safety net when something goes wrong, right? That's the useful, but we can do so much to bring that spirit to the digital experiences and to innovate. And to now a lot of companies talk about personalization, and in retail specifically, like if you go to any of these retail conferences, 90% of the vendors are personalization, right? But essentially, in my opinion, these are just algorithms that are best guess recommendations. And this is, I'm borrowing this from Jeff Bezos talk early in the early days of Amazon, where he says, yes, our algorithms provide best guess recommendations. Right? There's a huge difference, in my opinion, to the customer experience, to how you feel or how companies help you between guessing based on a lot of data and then really understanding you and providing meaningful personalization.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that background. And I remember seeing some videos probably 11, 12 years ago where they brought cameras into the Zappos customer service area, their contact center area, and there was a lot of energy. And they brought people down to the shipping area, the cameras down there, and people were incredibly excited to fulfill an order and get it out. They said, well, we'll have it to you by Wednesday, but you'll get it a day early. So tell me your favorite story that's a customer service related or a customer experience related story.
That's there's so many that I have to think. I mean, it's really, again, part of those rituals and the culture is when I started Zappos. Now things have changed a little bit, but when I onboarded Zappos, everybody had to go through 4 weeks of intense customer service training. Think about that. 4 weeks intense customer service training, which regardless of whether you are VP before or you are a barista or server in a restaurant in Vegas, there was about 30, 40 people in the basement there was no cell coverage or anything. It was just first name basis. There was no VPs or whatever, right? Everybody was just first name basis. And they made it really hard. And from the second day, we got on the phones, and they made it even harder with, had to dealt with the actual customers, and the people who helped you, I think it was intentional. They made it a bit more noisy and a bit more chaotic. And it's one of the hardest things I've done, and makes you appreciate this profession. But then you also get to interact with customers and hear their stories and so on. And we have these customer service phone calls that probably should be in the Guinness World Book of Records, because the longest one was 10 hours, 50 minutes or something like that, over 10 hours. And these are really story-worthy and kind of sound shocking, but I personally was on a call about an hour and a half with a customer, and sometimes we talk to customers, sometimes we listen into the real pros, talk to them, and sometimes people just have to, they don't call to buy shoes, they call to tell their story, or they're bedridden and they need to talk to someone. But that is, that was commonplace. Some of the more stories that you really tell over and over, the story when Tony was talking, we had some friends, they were outside somewhere in Vegas having dinner and drinks, and he was talking about this great customer service, and he told them, look, you can call customer service now, don't tell who's calling and ask them to deliver pizza to us. And this person didn't. They delivered the pizza, right? And
you're a shoe company,
exactly. And look, this is, again, sounds a bit unusual, but as part of the routine customer service calls, if we don't carry it, our customer service agents helps you buy it off of Nordstrom, off of another retailer, which tells you again where the focus is.
Yeah. You're living it, not just saying it like so many say, kind of give it lip service. You guys have and continue to live it. Yeah. So Alex, a number of things have changed over those years, and one of the buzzwords today is big data. Companies are trying to get big data and do things like AI, machine learning, and robotic process engineer and all these different things to try to automate. And like you said, perhaps it's personalization, perhaps it's I don't know, reduced cost. I don't know what their motivations are, but then there's a tension there between that and customer loyalty. And you write about some of this, you explore some of those concepts in your new book. So tell us about the white space. That there's a lot of business books out there, but the white space that you saw out there and that created a need in your mind for a book like this.
Sure, Mark. Yes. I mean, it was precisely this tension that you mentioned. I realized that there was this really these two clashing mega trends, if you will, right? One is the fascination with big data science. I mean, just of course, business nowadays is based on numbers because you need to, businesses report to shareholders on a regular basis, and it's all numbers. That's business runs on numbers. There's no question about that. That's how things should be, right? That's how business operates. But then technology evolved to the point where it's so easy to collect data and to store it and to analyze it. And then we get these ultra bright people to write algorithms to work with that data. And so it's so powerful that it makes you think that it's a panacea. It can solve anything, right? Oh yeah, we get the data and you can personalize and you can do this. Look, there's some experiences, and we write this. I have two co-authors, and we talk about this in the book. There are some experiences that, I mean, data and data science and algorithms have changed our lives, I mean, incredibly for the better. Take Google Maps. I mean, it's Google, I think they're underrated in terms of they have some of the most amazing technology. It's so commonplace that we don't talk about it, but it's so powerful, right? I mean, imagine Google Maps, right? Before, what was driving? You may end up having to drive, in precarious conditions, right? Think back a few years, right, where you had like Tom's Guide, or you had written like a few instructions on somebody had written like on a piece of paper, and turn left on this street and turn right on that street, right? Or you have Tom's Guide next to you, like you look down, right? So now you open Google and they actually predict to the minute that when you're going to arrive. They crunch all these numbers. So that's amazing. There's so many other examples I can give you, but the point is these are all experiences that are shared by all, right? It benefits everybody. There's no need to personalize, right? Everybody benefits from these because everybody has the need to get from point A to point B and so on. But when it comes to personalization, we start talking about, so the other mega trend is this, like you said, focus on creating emotional experiences and long-time loyalty and so on. But then you understand, if you think about it, that many of these mechanical approaches like data science and their mechanism, back in the day it was machines, but there are different types of machines now. But the same fascination was back then. That if you don't bake in empathy and you don't bake in psychological understanding of customers in those algorithms, you're going to end up with pretty absurd things. Like, for example, you renovate your backyard and you buy a gas grill, and then online, and then the confirmation page then offers you 10 more gas grills. Why not, right? Bought one. You probably have space in your backyard for 10 more, and here's what other customers also bought this other grill. And unless you're a collector of gas grills, it doesn't make much sense. So, but that's the best guess recommendation approach because it works for some things in general and on the average, but you cannot average humans and you cannot average customer experience, right? I don't know if you heard the story of the statistician who had his head in a hot oven and feet in a block of ice, but on the average, they felt just fine, right?
I
Average
like that.
English was, I mean, I could do a whole hour of stand-up comedy on this, right? Myself on a personal level, that married, live in Las Vegas. We have 2.4 beautiful children, right?
Yeah.
Nicholas is point. Gets teased in
I
school.
love it.
So on and on.
Wow, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I apologize for jumping right in because I was so uh, excited about the subject matter that I forgot to mention the name of the new book, which is Forget the Customer, See the Person. And it relates to what you just were talking about. And then the subtitle there is A Business Guide to Understanding Your Customers in Uncertain Times and Beyond.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So this relates really to what we were talking about. Are there any other key themes in the book?
I mean, this is the main theme, and we wrote it with two main purposes. One was to inspire a new way of thinking, or at least rethinking how we approach customer experience. And then another one was to give some practical advice. One of my co-authors is a neuroscience PhD turned market researcher, and he's the expert in segmentation. He does all the rocket science math, right? All the brain stuff. But I think we've tried to make it very high level and just give enough tools to say, okay, now if you want to understand your customers on a deeper psychological level, do these things, X, Y, Z. Right? You can just talk to them, you can observe them, right? And that's what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative data and approaches. These are all very practical business discussions, but many times they kind of stay at the surface, and you never really examine, what they really mean, right?
Yeah. Well, I love the story about that you shared about being in the basement and that everybody was equals down there going through training and that sort of indoctrination and this walking in their shoes. Talk about empathy. I mean, that's a great way to to learn about empathy. And we did that where I worked as well. We had people with headset, two sets of another set of headsets with the person as they were listening, and going into, it was banking, so going into a branch and getting behind the teller line and trying to listen in on the customer. See, you could see. I would say, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, but when they watched the customer service people deal with 7 different systems where they had to log in, log out, log in, log out to get a single answer. And then in one case, I forget what the particular function was, but they'd have to wait for a call back from this vendor to get an answer for a customer. I'm sorry, I'll have to call you back. I mean, they saw that, and that really after that, they invested in a multi-million-dollar platform. So you had a single service log on. But does that resonate with you?
Absolutely, Mark. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's once you see, and technology is also is complicated, but you hit the nail on the head. It's because most companies do not invest in the experience of the customer service people, right? And customer service folks don't have a choice in what systems they use. So then they end up with this probably very unusable, difficult to use, confusing, frustrating set of tools and systems, right? Because nobody ever invested in making their experience better, so that they can create a better experience for the customer. But the Zappos approach was hire the very best for that role, right? And that's partly why Tony moved Zappos to Vegas, because Vegas has, it's a city that never sleeps. Many people are used to not sleeping because they're in the service industry here anyway. So then you provide them a much better experience and atmosphere, and you hire really great people, sense of humor, happy people, right?
Right.
You can hear the don't.
Right. So, yeah. And so I don't mean to cut you off, but in the book, you mentioned this concept, meaningful personalization. And we hit on maybe it's related to what we talked about before about these companies trying to personalize, and after you bought a grill, they're offering you 6 more. Say more about what meaningful personalization is.
Absolutely. I think the idea of meaning, right? Again, it goes back to how you make people feel. I think that's what it's all about. And
Mm-hmm.
one example that to make it real that we talk about in the book is gift giving, right? This whole concept of gift giving, that's gonna make it kind of vivid, right? So let's say what gift do you give to somebody who you don't know, right? Maybe cash, right? Like you want to give them
Cash, yeah.
cash, right? So one level up above that in terms of getting to know somebody, maybe a gift card, right? You know that they like movies, right? So, or the type of, they like steak, so give them a steak gift card, right? What would happen if you give cash to your spouse of 20 years and say, here, honey, buy yourself something nice for your birthday? How do you
Yeah,
again
it's
go
not going to turn out well.
not well, right? But so or what gift? What about you want to give a gift to a billionaire that can afford anything? You give him $100,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or give him $100,000, right? Well, how are you going to make them feel better, right? It's by giving them something that's meaningful to them. So in the case of your spouse, if you're attentive, you would have without them having to tell you, you kind of know what they need or what they like, right? They mentioned something months ago, you remember it, and then you kind of surprise them and delight them that way. Or to a billionaire or somebody who can afford anything, you give them something, I don't know, nostalgic or something from the childhood, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that is, I think that's the difference. So how close can we get to knowing, and it's hard to know millions of people that way, right? If you have a customer base of millions of people, but I think we need to try, right? Again, asking some questions. And in the case of this example from the backyard grill, I've borrowed from a speaker that I invited to talk at Zappos. He was heading digital experiences for Walmart. Really, really brilliant guy. He gave this example and said, well, the meaningful way of doing this is if we know that now, Mark, is just you are renovating your backyard and you like to entertain people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you bought a grill, then I have to ask you, well, do you want a big table? Like if you have a lot of friends, we know that you live in a certain area that gets cold. Maybe do you have the heaters out there? If that's what you want to do, is you want to entertain people, right? You want to gather people. That would be more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, it sounds like a fascinating book. Before we land the plane here, I wanted to ask you about what Zappos has got planned, or have you guys decided to expand beyond shoes?
I don't think so, Mark. I mean, I'm not aware of any of that, but you mentioned Zappos Adaptive. One of the ways in which Zappos always innovates is this started even before the pandemic, and this is a great example because it was the idea was generated by one of the team members who's not a customer service rep, but he worked in merchandising, but he was on these calls. And he spoke to somebody that had a child with a disability or something like that. And then the idea that we need to help, people with disabilities, for example, right? And then being inclusive is very broad, right? That includes different body shapes, body sizes, but then it's a very it's a broad spectrum, right? You have
Right.
people that are, let's say, amputees that only need one shoe, or people with different size feet. You'd be surprised, like you're in good company. There's a lot of people whose feet are not exactly the same size. So Zappos Adaptive was born out of that to help people with disabilities. We sponsor the Special Olympics. Right, we work with models that are represent this community and so on. So that's one example. And there's many other ways in which we innovate in terms of the business models going beyond wholesale, kind of back to drop ship and consignment and so on, to help the vendors who are really strapped during the pandemic.
And just to go back to the adaptive, then I assume that members of the military or other people who have lost limbs, would you sell them with just one shoe?
Absolutely. I mean, we have programs that, just honor members of the military, teachers, right? Service people. These are just auxiliary programs. But you see, the theme is inclusivity, right? Inclusivity that's just beyond gender or age, right?
Yeah. A special project, and clearly it demonstrates empathy.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Fascinating stuff, from the ritual dances to what we just talked about, adaptive, to the story about the grills and all the other things we talked about. Fascinating, and wish you the best luck. Couple of things. One, if listeners want to purchase your book, what's the best place for them to buy it?
It's on Amazon.
Okay, on Amazon. And secondly, if they want to connect with you somehow, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, best way is on LinkedIn. They can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, awesome. Well, let me just thank you so much for being on the Delighted Customers podcast. It was a pleasure having you.
It's the pleasure was all mine, Mark, and it's the delighted participants too, I can tell you.
Well, thanks for listening to the Delighted Customers podcast. I want to ask you to do two things. If you've enjoyed this episode or any of my other ones, hit subscribe. I've got a lot of other great guests that are coming up and a lot of other great content, and I don't want you to miss anything. And if you've gotten something out of this, share it with someone. Make sure they have access to all this content and all the other great content coming up. You can find any links or references on the show in the show notes, and you can find those on my website at empoweredcx.com.